So, what is the biggest mistake you see first-time competitors make when it comes to posing?
Hmm, I would say, and this may be dependent on what I'm hearing from other people, because I'm like a transition since we're focused on OCB here. I would say what I've been seeing as of late is their lack or ability to engage their core properly. I feel like there's a lot of people that tend to pull a vacuum instead of setting it to
Mm.
their abs and exhaling and getting their abs locked in. And on top of that, especially with something like OCB, I feel like OCB and other federations do this too, but I've seen it mostly in OCB. They really push you guys to pose there for a very long time. And so the common mistake is not able to hold the abs for too long. So it's like that. I mean, that's all in the practice room right there. So the posing mistake will have to be the core, not only for men's physique, but in all divisions as well.
That is such a good point. Like, obviously in classic, it is really great if you can pull a vacuum in classic. But
Yes.
in men's physique, that's not really the desired look. Look, in your freestyle sort of posing round,
Mhm.
do what you want to do. But as far as the mandatory poses go, we're not really looking for a vacuum. So that really, that core, that abdominal control is going to be important. And sort of to branch off of that, when you're talking about abdominal control, obviously you coach athletes in posing, yes. Do you coach them in training as well?
No, just for posing. That's all I do full time.
Just for posing. Excellent. So with that in mind, what conversations are you having with athletes if you, as just the posing coach, maybe think their conditioning isn't where it's at or where it needs to be?
I set expectations from the start. I tell them that everything you know about posing, we scratch that. We're going to bring in a new foundation. And the foundation is I always start from the ground up, meaning I start with their feet and then we work our way up. And then I really highlight eventually the core is going to be very important, especially in men's physique, because that's kind of our eye catcher, our vocal point when we see men's physique. It's just a nice shredded core and making sure it's all stacked, the abdominals, and on top of that, going back to the question is, I feel like a lot of people lack opening up their lats both in front and back poses as well. A lot of people are always shrugging shoulders or pitching their scapula, where I like to have their scapula open all the time. So there's that in addition to your question.
Most definitely. And so you bring up some important points there. I've always, whenever first started competing, my heart's in open bodybuilding, just for all reference.
Okay,
But
cool.
you learn to pose from the ground up, right? You need to learn how to set your feet, and then you bring in that there's a couple of concepts that are important for that illusion, the wide cap shoulders, and then the tight waist. So how do you talk to athletes about creating that illusion with the lats, with the waist, by setting the feet appropriately?
Yes. So usually, if I were to make it very simple for someone, I have people stand about shoulder width apart. The problem is when I say shoulder width apart, they think their shoulders are a lot smaller than they think. So it has to be a wide.
Mm.
Yeah. So I have them make their stance shoulder width apart. And then I have them lean into one leg because we're trying to elevate the other heel. We usually lean into one leg. And then once the footwork is positioned, I usually have them rotate their hips about 45 degrees. I usually use the same 45-degree cue just as a staple. And that's how we shrink the waist because men's physique is looking for that nice small taper. I don't have them overdo it just because if they start to overdo it, their front pose begins to look like a side pose for OC,
Yeah.
which we don't want that. And then from there, I cue them to open up their lats. Most of the time, people can't open up their lats on their own. So I have them hook their thumb, the thumb that is closest to the judges, on their hip. And I have the hip, I have them channel a lot of their energy and flexion into the thumb itself. So they could focus their attention to the thumb so they don't have to flex or activate the scapula too much. Like they're more focused on the thumb to the point where when they hook their thumb on their hip and they open up their lat, it's like their lat starts to slowly open up, their scapula is opening up. And then on top of that, I kind of tell them like, relax, you don't need to. Posing, you're not flexing as much as you think. If anything,
Mm.
you're flexing maybe around 80% intensity. Um, but yes, so and I highlight the open lats too, just because it's just like we have the lats, wide shoulders, going down to the waist. I set the 45 degrees small waist. And then the feet are about shoulder width apart because I'm also creating an X frame as well from the shoulders to the small waist to the feet. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So when you were talking about turning at about a 45, that was on the planted leg?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all about creating that illusion there. And then you were talking about hand placement and thumb, and I think that's a great cue for lat because it's almost like you're doing a little baby lat spread
Mhm.
just with one arm right there. Where else should athletes be focused on in terms of hand placement on that hip? What do you like to cue? What do you like to tell them?
What I like to do with that one, it's very tricky. It's like it's more of a like a conversation where you see me and I see you, and then we're kind of like trying to figure it out together. But I usually like to hook the thumb and rest the knuckles on the hip bone towards the front. So it's yes. And that's pretty much it. A lot of people do this right here where it's like the pinky's facing the judges. I'm not a huge fan of the pinky facing the judges. I like to have like a nice flushed like fist to wrist going up to the forearm, and then there's so much to it that I look at into a pose where I'm not only looking at like the how it looks, but I'm also looking at the lines, the silhouette of the whole pose. Because if I position my fist like this on my hip up into my forearm, it should create the same parallel line of my lat that is on top right here. So I'm trying to complement my arms complement my lats. It's really hard to explain, but if you see it, you'll start to see it more. It's like, oh, okay, it's good.
Most definitely understandable. Now, does that change with athletes? Use everybody's individual sort of anthropometry, different limb lengths. Do limb lengths come into play whenever you are perfecting an individual's sort of pose?
Yes, it really does. For example, the individual with longer arms, sometimes I might have to lower their hand a little bit lower on their hip. I don't like the hand to be underneath, let's say, if they had a pocket. I don't want it underneath the pocket because it does look strange. But I do like to lower the hand enough where they don't have much of, let's say, like a gap between their arm to their lat. I try to close that gap as much as possible, just because I don't want them to see. With the person with long arms, you don't want to have too many openings. I feel like that's when we expose ourselves. But if we're talking about other federations, I would give them like a both hands off hip pose instead, because long arms tend to look better with both hands off hip.
Oh, goodness, that's interesting. So, like, as I said, I'm coming from this sort of OCB perspective. Could you talk a little bit about the differences between the organizations and what the expectations are for, let's say, front, side, and back poses?
Front side back poses. Let's see. So for OCB, I believe they're the same because you guys don't do a one hand on hip at all, right? On
We
the
do,
back pose.
on the back pose. No, no, no. That's fully both hands flared out.
Okay, gotcha. So back pose is generally the same for most federations, I've noticed. The front pose is the same as well. It's just for the NPC, IFBB, they have more options. So they have a one hand on hip, but the one hand on hip is there's a traditional way of doing it because some guys switch their hands. So you want the hand that is closest to the judges to be the one hooked on your hip. If you switch that hand, then the pose becomes a fit model pose from the NPC or becomes like a bikini variation front, like how bikini competitors, how they compete the upper body. That's how you would look if you were to switch your hands. So it looks very odd. So only like people that know bodybuilding would notice it and they'll make fun of you inside your head. But anyways, so yes, I digress. So one hand on hip is the pose that IFBB likes to do. And then they have a front on Superman. So that's both hands off hip facing forward. And then there's the traditional way of a one hand on hip, but you have your hands on your hip. So it's like an angled Superman. I call it angled Superman. And then there's both hands off hip, which is good for people with either big arms or long arms. Yeah. And then there's I think I've touched all my bases. Those are all the poses. Both hands off, Superman, angle Superman, one hand on hip.
Now, do you do any as far as like foot placement goes? Because in the OCB, there are two sort of variations of that side pose where it is almost just like a modified front pose. And then there is one where you can step, bring that leg across your body, and then
Yes.
angle towards the judges. Could you talk about that pose a little bit? Do you use
Yes.
it often? Do you not use it often?
It depends on, I like to shoot for what can what product could we get sooner? What product could we get to sooner that looks good on the athletes? And what is the most comfortable? Because one thing you're also battling with is a lot of lack of hip mobility or thoracic rotation is another thing too that a lot of people struggle with. So if someone struggles with thoracic rotation, then I would give them we'll use the word would you say staggered stance? So it's when
Step, yeah, staggered stance, yeah.
yeah, a stagger stance is probably like I'm trying to find the right word now. So, which one would you call the stagger stance? The one where both of your feet are facing the side of the stage and the front foot is back, or the front foot is forward?
Front foot is forward.
That's a stagger stance.
Yes, I would say, well, where traditionally, so you have your one leg that's planted, and then you maybe take a step and bring that other leg in front of it, and
And
then
that's
twist.
yes, that's the stagger stance.
Yeah, to me,
Per-
to me.
okay, perfect. So I'll use that phrase. So someone who may lack thoracic mobility, I would not give them the staggered stance. I would give them the opposite, where their hips feel a little bit more open when the other foot is back, and that's when I would turn them towards the judges and we hit that side pose. But I've found more success where the staggered stance looks the best for most people.
Hmm, that's really interesting. Does now again back to sort of that conditioning because in those EB we're judging for symmetry first, and then muscularity and conditioning. So your symmetry can get thrown off depending on what your conditioning level's at. Really just depends. So in that side pose, and individual genetics being different, do you find that people with more well-developed serratus and obliques, do they look better in that pose? If someone is more blocky, do you tend to put them in that pose, or would you have them more open? What do you think about that genetic differences?
It all depends again. It all depends on their mobility and their thoracic rotation. Because you could get a boxy person with a boxy frame to twist that much, but it depends if they're putting enough time to put in their mobility time. But I personally kind of like the stagger stance more because when you lock out that front leg that's closest to the judges, it kind of puts you in a better position to engage that oblique and serratus. Where if the leg is back, it's kind of you don't have your hip to support you to turn into it. That's why I kind of use that as a cheat code. That's why I like using the stagger stance.
Interesting entry. So more on posing. So if you could control an athlete's entire prep, when should posing actually become a focus? Not when people usually start, but when would you have them begin posing?
Mm. As soon as possible, really. But if I were to give like a timestamp, I would say 24 weeks out.
24, that's almost people's whole prep. That's more than some people's prep.
I would say 24 weeks out. I'm very confident where I could teach people everything they need to know, how they should be doing it in 4 sessions, and they wouldn't need me after that. Like I would rather teach them the good foundations and habits from the beginning. And now that they know all of those things, and I always send over notes and diagrams and like some videotapes for them to follow. If they would just follow those perfectly, then they don't need me. I kind of we'll use a word. I kind of market myself in that way where it's just that's how I'm able to funnel through a lot of different athletes throughout the year.
Hmm. And that's, in my opinion, that's a mark of a good coach. You want to coach yourself out of a job.
Yes.
If you're doing well for your client, you're coaching yourself out of a job essentially. But then good word of mouth comes about and things like that. So three things that I appreciate about your posing: the TPF theme, presence, and flow. So your individual routines, they have that theme. And as far as presence goes, the good eye contact with the judges, the eye contact with the audience, the shift in the eye gaze to whenever you're setting a movement. And then what I mean by flow is not just obviously you and your athletes hit the mandatories very well, but it is the space between each pose, the transitions, that just all comes together for me. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of transitions and how they sort of create more in a routine?
I feel like transitions really help us express our personality. And there's like two different formats I usually give an example when I'm talking to people, when I'm on the phone call to see where their style is when it comes to their transitions and flows. And so I asked these two questions. I'm like, first of all, I asked how well they know bodybuilding, like the world of bodybuilding. And then second of all, ask Do you like how Arnold poses, or do you like how Terrence Ruffin poses? Do you know who Terrence Ruffin is? Yes, Rough Diesel. So Rough Diesel is known to be a very artistic, nice and elegant flow type of poser, where Arnold was more fast but strong and a lot of power. And so it's just like there's two different flows that we're playing with, the artistic and then there's the power. And so I try to find the individual's character by kind of talking to them, who their favorite athletes are, just so I could get into their mind psychology wise, like, okay, so they will categorize that after from one of these two people. And once I figured that out, then that's when I adjust and pose them to that type of style. Power is, I'll break it down super simple. So the in between poses, so from one pose to another to transition to the back, I usually have people open their hands so they can be very loose. And as you open up your hands, I let the momentum of you pivoting from the front to the back to kind of control where your hands will be going as you turn around to the back. That's how we kind of create a really nice, smooth transition for a lot of people. But as you set into your pose, I like the hands closed. It's the hands that make the pose and look very elegant and mesmerizing. I use this analogy of, have you ever seen like those pictures of like hypnotists and there's like a lot of hands kind of like parallel like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it was just like, use that trick to kinda help us pose where it's like you open hand and then fist, open hand, fist. Like if you apply that into your pose and you'll see like more elegant into the pose. Going back into the Arnold and Terrence Ruffin examples, once I figure out how we could flow and they understand the movements of opening and closing hands, that's when I play with tempo, because that's what it is. There's simply different tempos. Arnold is power, the other one is artistic. Artistic, I would say, is more, it's just slower. It's a slower tempo. They're very controlled and slow, where Arnold is more like a ease in, ease out, like very fast and then slows down and then fast and slows down again. And that's how I determine for those individuals.
So interesting. Posing flow in the transitions. So as far as like if someone comes to you, and I'm sure you probably get this more now than in the beginning, hey Josh, I want a Dragon Ball Z inspired posing routine. Does that happen to you often? And how do you go about creating the sort of signature movements that I see in all your Instagram reels? How is it exactly that for Dragon Ball Z or for any of the other animes or Marvel or things like that, you come up with these fantastic movements that represent whatever that whatever that shot is in the movie or in the anime?
Like, where do I get those shots from those mediums and how do I apply them into posing? Is that what your question is?
Yeah, yeah. How do you obviously how do you take images from Dragon Ball Z, like sort of a Frieza stance,
Mhm.
other things like that? How do you turn that into a pose? Like what's your process?
My process is very simple. So I used to do animation school, and in animation school, we studied a lot of frame rates and poses. So it's like when you see an animated movie like Toy Story, the reason why we're so attracted to the image is because they're constantly doing dynamic poses from frame to frame. Like, for example, you would see someone like Woody where he's like super happy and then he jumps and it's that jump itself that's a pose. And that is like the key point where like we're gonna use this frame and go from that. And then from there, there's like, what will you do after that? And then he would move on to this other side and he does another dynamic pose. So it's those dynamic poses is where I notice, since they do that a lot in animation, that's when I have this thought where, oh, posing is everywhere. So I would like watch like an Iron Man movie. Iron Man, like his pose is like he's moving and then he's about to blast someone. That's a pose itself right there. So it's just like, how could I create that pose that everybody knows about into bodybuilding that could also be like an Easter egg for people, but yet we're still like highlighting the nostalgic, the little inner child that we want to let out too on stage. Because yeah, so that's how I pull everything. Like even like anime, like Dragon Ball, like there's a lot of Dragon Ball characters they power up, so they kind of like squeeze down and do this. And so I use that a lot into like a back post setup. Like you kind of like charge up squeezing And then sometimes they look over their shoulder because they're about to like take off. That's why I use a lot of my line of sight, looking over shoulders and squeezing into back poses just to kind of give more of that character. So, to hit two birds with one stone, that's where I kind of get the line of sight and where to look is from also anime, Marvel, DC, because they're always in poses. They're looking specific ways. They look heroic. And so I'm always like, how could I make posing look more heroic for the individual?
Wow, dude, that is so interesting. It's so interesting how different areas of our life, like what you went to school for, influences what you do now, and just how that comes together differently for different people. So, as far as like your life, what are the biggest inspirations from anime, pop culture that just sort of that you draw on? Maybe not for clients, but for yourself.
Inspirations is definitely like the Marvel DC anime for the animation. Like the animation really helped me open my mind as to how to find poses to make my poses unique. My coaching and understanding how figures work and how to manipulate figures. I mean, growing up, I was into action figures. I collected the Marvel Legends and different like He-Man, Street Sharks. I collected a lot of Predator, Alien. I had so many figures that I like to play with, and sometimes I wouldn't even play with them. I would like position them to make them be in these dynamic poses, and they would just sit on the shelf for months, and I would be proud of how they looked. And so I feel like that also inspired by the time I got into posing coaching. It's like essentially I'm just looking at action figures, but in real life, and I'm just trying to position them by telling them how to move instead of having to touch them. Uh, which that's another thing. As a posing coach, I don't do this at like 95% of the time. I don't do this, but I don't touch people when I coach people, like in person at least. I never try to move their body parts because, in my opinion, if you're teaching someone how to throw a punch, you're never gonna grab their fist and move their fist into the person's face to like try to help them learn. They have to rep it out in a specific way. So I'm more about cues. But anyways, going back, another thing that kind of helped me get into the whole artistic eye is I since age 3, I've been a illustrator. So I was going to school for illustration and animation, and most of my love pulls from, here, actually, I'll show you right here. I'll show you how my art was. I haven't drawn too much just because this workload stops me, but this is like an example of what I've drawn in the past.
Well, you drew that Batman?
Yeah, so that's pen and just Sharpie.
That is wild, man.
Let's see. You probably like so this is Ninja Turtles. This is
Whoa,
yeah.
that is wild.
So this is like an example where it's like, here, I'll actually pull out something and this will help in posing. So this is Spawn.
Spawn.
Yeah. This is Spawn. So how I break down a physique is when you draw people, they actually I learned this from Jim Lee. He's like a well-known artist in the Marvel world. They always start with the torso. So they always draw the torso first, and then they just kind of go off of that. And so sometimes when I look at physiques, I start from the ground up, but when I'm trying to highlight something, I almost look at people like action figure now, where I see the torso right here, and then I see the shoulder joints attached right here as well. And then I look at the arms, and then I see I'm pretty sure you've had a G.I. Joe before where you kind of popped, like you see the torso to a pelvis connection like that. That's like another thing too. I just kind of see in my mind, all thanks to how I used to construct drawing.
Wow, so you're taking all of those illustration skills and just mapping them on to physique athletes.
Yes.
So incredibly interesting. So we've talked a lot about, we've been sort of dancing around individual routines, individual poses, transitions, and things like that. But there is that part where, bodybuilding is a competition. You have the 5 to 7 judges in the audience. You have the stage, which can come at various heights and angles. And then depending on how big the class is, whether it's, 5 people or 9 people, you have different angles that
Mhm.
you're going to be working with. And that's a different kind of coaching than just, someone's individual routine. So how do you go about coaching someone whenever you have all those variables, judges at a different sort of eye level than them, so angling sort of down a little bit if that's what you do, and then also where the athlete is at on the stage? How do you talk about that?
Yeah. So it all comes down to understanding the front pose. Sometimes people, when they practice, they create a little box for themselves and they pose on a box. I like that, but for the most part, I have found more success posing without a box, more because I want you to practice getting into a front pose wherever you are. I could just stand here, make a 360 and just hit my front pose at a 360 angle, at a 180 angle, 45, but just, and anywhere, right? And so once they understand the mechanics of how they could get into their front pose, now we just need to like, I need to tell them how we could make sure you're angling your pose to a judge. So what I usually do is the foot that is slightly stepped forward towards the judges, that is like your compass. Your foot should be pointing about 12 o'clock. So that's when you should just like pivot your foot and kind of angle yourself. I tell them just to like, just scope the entire the judging bound. If and you just have to just gauge that your pose is in a good position where they can all see you in a good your best angle. I usually have to make it simple for them sometimes, I usually tell them like just pose towards the main three judges in the middle. Yeah.
That's such a good cue.
Hmm. That's it.
Because it's hard. It is a game of angles, and one of the hardest things about being a judge, we can only judge what we see. And if you are not angled towards me, I cannot compare you to the guy who is angled towards me. Even if the head judge, if I have communication with them and we're shifting people around, if at no point you are angled appropriately, how am I supposed to judge your physique? So that is really important.
Or I tell them too is if you're on the outside, be aware that's the times where we will most likely have to angle your poses. If you're in like the middle four physiques, you should be fine. And then it's all dependent on how large the stage is too. When it comes to, I notice a lot of OCB, you're actually like, I actually tell people to pose almost like very upright because some of these OCB stages, the athletes are kind of far. So it's just like, they don't need to angle their pose. They just need to stand there from a distance. So if anything, the only thing I play with is downlighting. I just have their back pose, for example, their back pose. If they lift their chest up high enough, then I use cast shadows to help their back look a little bit more detailed if they want to go for that. Front poses, I don't really lean forward too much as I used to, just because it makes it look funky, where sometimes if they in a front pose, if they lean too much and they kind of crunch into their abdominals more, and then they look very boxy, the shoulder starts to roll forward. A tip though for a front pose, if you lean into your toes, that I rather do that than to a intentionally leaning your upper body, if that makes sense. If you lean into your toes, it's almost like a Michael Jackson, like leaning forward type of feeling. Yeah. Then that should angle your pose a little.
Very cool. Flipping it back to the back, you had mentioned sort of just creating more of those lines and back detail with just a little bit of back English. Do you have a specific cue for elbow height or flaring the lats, or is that how do you do that?
Usually for the cue to open up the lats, I usually say, imagine you're hugging a big tree with your elbows. So I hug, and usually, and then, but before that, I say, make sure your traps are turned off. If you want your lats to open, the traps need to be off. So that's like a second thing I tell people. For elbows and hand positioning, I usually have their elbow lined up with their upper lats, and their fists are lined up with their lower lats.
Hmm. Mhm.
Just make it very consistent, because there's some people that are like punching their fist so far out of their body or too high up into like a motorcycle position. Sometimes I play with different cues depending on the individual. Sometimes I just have them open up their lats, and if you feel like your fists are hovering away from your abdominals, you're good.
Such good cues. Another thing in terms of posing and being on stage, like let's say it's a tight class
Mhm.
and you're getting moved around a lot. Something we see from the judges table is athletes resetting, right? You have to reset your composure, whether that's in your side, your front, or your back pose. Do you discuss sort of resetting? What does it look like? How do you have them breathe?
Mhm.
Things like that.
So for resetting, I personally don't like resetting because I know I could not reset. So it's just like, if I could not reset, then you should not reset. And sometimes I say like, hey, sometimes if it comes down to it, like, hey, everybody is looking awesome, the winner is probably going to be the person that doesn't break out of their pose. Like, have that mentality to like hold it the longest. But to reset, um, I tell people reset when you know for sure no judge is looking at you, because you can see all the judges
Mm.
looking, and if they're not looking, and do a reset, do a chest squeeze, do a formation of covering your abs with your forearm so you could reset your midsection. That's really about it. Or I do chest squeezes too, because sometimes when we're out there posing for so long, we might tend to get a little flat. So let's pump some blood back into the chest and shoulders by doing like a chest squeeze. And another opportunity where they could reset is when they switch with people. But when I have people switch, I never like to have them show a side profile of their body. I tell them to always keep your frame squared towards the judges so you can look wide still, and then just shift kind of in your front pose, but cover your abs at the same time. Like I'm all about just presentation the entire time because for me, I don't know. I thought about it. I was just like, I'm paying like $500+ to compete, so I want to make sure like my time is not wasted.
That is a real thing. Contests, I mean, competing is expensive. And when you think about prepping for multiple shows, I mean, the cost just keeps going up and up. Hmm. As far as your training, so obviously you're a bodybuilder,
Mm.
and does the category of men's physique influence how you train your body? And if so, how?
Yes. So, I mean, I feel like there's a special look that men's physique has that is very different to a classic physique competitor. And you could almost see it when, like, you could search your favorite pro men's physique competitor doing a front double bicep, and then you could look at a classic competitor do a front double bicep. There's just like a different shape to it all. So to answer your question, yes, like you should be training in a specific way. You can't have too much of a big back unless you're that freaky. I don't know, but keep on training the back, but it's all like upper chest is shoulders and core. Like those are the three main things I'm seeing the most. And like you still want to have legs. Like you want to make sure your board shorts are nicely filled and they look athletic. I'll use the word athletic. What I kind of tell people just to kind of look for is men's physique is kind of the more Jack Spider-Man physique, and classic physique is like the Captain America look. So
Those are some good pop culture references for that. Now, specifically, I know you have in the past talked about a specific menswear competitor suits. So, what do you like? Who do you like to go with in terms of men's physique suits?
mm, for the shorts, the board shorts, right? Yes. I may be a little biased because I am an athlete for them, but Manifest competition wear is very well constructed actually because I dive into the common mistake of where a lot of people order shorts and they may be too loose, too big on the waist, too big on the lower body. I feel like Manifest, even if you get your size a little bit too high or too small, it will still fit you snug in some way because they stretch that much. And so it's like the consistency of returning rate is, I feel like it's very slow for them. The only thing that's different from, and that's another thing too with board shorts, they say a size 28, but a size 28 doesn't mean what you'd think a size 28 would be. Like say I wear 32 pants, but I could wear a size 27 on board shorts. But some athletes out there, especially the ones that are losing a lot of weight, like, that have never worn those sizes, they kinda get in their head, "Oh my gosh, I don't think I could wear these." I'm like, "No, trust me, I see your frame, like, you could wear 28s." So, Manifest competition wear is good because not only are they, the fit is more consistent and stretchy, but I also feel like the patterns are very simple and
Mm.
it's kind of like have bold colors where it's not a lot going on, but it looks very powerful and strong. I like it personally just because I'm all into superheroes. It kind of gives like a superhero look. Because sometimes I know people say, hey, like let's get like crazy shorts so the judges can notice us more. But sometimes if you get too crazy shorts, it kind of looks ugly. It's like wearing like ugly floral, I don't know, pastel up there. It's just off. But on top of that, you got to wear colors that kind of, some people like to match the theme of the show with the shorts. And
Mm.
you got to find a board short company that has like solid colors where you could kind of do it with multiple shows. So yeah, there's a lot more to
Which
it.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah, most definitely. And that's so important. You don't want the shorts too loose. You don't want them too long. You don't want them too short. And I feel like your tip on the waist, the 28, I mean, that's something that a lot of athletes are going to get wrong.
Mhm.
like right off their bat. They're gonna like, oh, well, I wear a 30 in pants, so I'm gonna get a 30 or something in the board shorts when that is just going to be probably too big
Yeah.
in terms of board shorts. So that is a really important tip right there. Well, hmm. So as far as you are a full-time posing coach, are you currently taking on new athletes, and what does being a full-time posing coach look like?
A full-time posing coach looks like a whole lot of marketing and a whole lot of jumping on calls. A lot of the times I'm like a 7 call day type of person. So I work with 7 people a day. And I like to split it into 4 days. And yes, I am taking on clients. I do have the time for everybody. It's just, yeah, sometimes it's hard to manage because I'm just a one-man team. I don't have a team underneath me. It's just me managing it all. But I love it. I love doing what I do. And how it works is a day in the life is very simple. It's like I go to the gym, I come home. Actually, during cardio, I start messaging people that are setting in forms and are interested in working with me. And then I set up a time to get them on board. Once I get them on board, that's when we go through my schedule. And then that's when they book whatever time works best for them. And then we just kind of go from there from until show day. Going back on, I want to point this out because I forgot to share this earlier. But going back to how far we should practice posing, I will warn a lot of people. It is hard to learn 4 weeks out. Very, very hard. Not just because it's mainly because 4 weeks out, especially if it's your first time, you will feel like trash the last 4 weeks, and also your attention span is very short, and it's also, like, you're gonna be tired. There's so many things going on, like, people get meltdowns the last 4 weeks, so that's why I say 24 weeks out. If you could just master those very early on, then it will be a breeze.
No, most definitely. And then especially like it becomes almost a cardio event, especially if you haven't been practicing posing. Like Lord knows going through mandatories over and over and over again. I mean, if you do that for 15 or 20 minutes, I mean that is going to tax you. And if you were just starting, you know, 4 weeks out, that's not going to be a good look for you as far as
Mhm.
just to where your energy's at. You're going to be carb glycogen depleted. It's not a great place to start. Your brain's not going to have the fuel it needs to appropriately sort of ingrain those things. So that's definitely an excellent point there.
Mhm.
Well, Josh, my man, honestly, I think we covered all the bases that I really wanted to get to today. Is there anything else that you would like to mention as far as what posing is to you?
Hmm. Let me gather my thoughts here. Posing is truly an art form. It's not only the tempo, it's not only the poses you hit, but it's the expression of what you want to just express in your show. And I feel like a lot of people lose their why when they're leading up to a show. Like always remember your why too, just because I feel like sometimes we get so focused on the outcome as well as like the medals and the first place and thinking we're gonna win the shows. Just always reflect on the progress and what it took for you to get there. I feel like a very successful prep is a prep where you didn't cheat on your diet or you didn't miss a workout or cardio session, and you also put in the time for posing. If you did all those things and control all those things and showed up on stage, even if you get last place, you did something very hard and something, and you were very disciplined. You came out as a more disciplined person than before. Like no one asked you to do it, but you're like a dog for doing it all. And that itself is like a win. And I like to close with, for me, my very first show I've ever done. Um, I thought I was gonna win the show, but because I was so focused on the outcome and I was just like, "This is my first time competing," like, people said I was jacked at the gym, but I guess I wasn't as jacked as these other people that are showing up, but I just showed up and these guys had 30 pounds on me. But I controlled my eating, my training, I hired a coach, I hired a opposing coach, I controlled everything. And my outcome, I didn't medal. I got last place on the first call out, which was a big deal for me because I had 15 guys on my call, but I made first call outs of those 15. And that was like a win for me. I didn't get a medal or anything. And I remember seeing a lot of my peers and people just sad because they didn't get a medal. But I sat there and like, man, I did something really hard. And through the process, I discovered I was good at posing. And that kind of guided me to be like, hey, let's make this into a business. And now I'm known internationally to be the guy. So it's just like you never know what opportunities you might get by just being perfect at a show and who you're going to meet in the long run.
And that's such an important mentality to have. There's this concept of finite and infinite games. And I feel like the athletes who, do one show and never do a show again treat the first show that they do as such a finite game. If I don't win my pro card, then what was this all about? But the athletes who continue to grow and to move forward treat it as an infinite game because the stage will always be there. You can always improve on your nutrition, your training, your coaching, your posing, show after show, training session after training session, and to treat it like an infinite game, something that you continue to come back to. That mentality of being process and not sort of outcome oriented is just something we're lacking in the sport. And, it really feels like you embody that. And I appreciate you sharing a lot of your wisdom today. So where can people go if they want to get a hold of you? What is the best way?
Josh X Matov on Instagram, and then that's the same name for all platforms. I'm pretty much on it everything, like Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, everywhere.
Most definitely. Well, appreciate your time, and maybe we can run it back for a round two if I get more questions up.
Okay, sounds good to me, Josh. Thank you. This was fun.